Okay, welcome to episode 27 of the Sean McGuinness podcast. And today we have on a very special guest, Dr. Krista Scott-Dixon. She's been a big inspiration for me. However, I don't really know your full background. So can you give us the short version of how you ended
Yeah, I give you the short version of a long, complicated
Yeah,
path. Yeah, my background is basically I was university faculty for many years, and then I kind of got sick of academia, and I took my skills in adult education and curriculum design and research and brought them into my secondary interest in health and fitness. Because as a grad student, of course, it's not the most health promoting lifestyle. So I essentially kind of self-taught myself in the beginning to get back into shape and start eating properly. So I kind of combined those two things into a job at Precision Nutrition. And at first I was just coaching, but then I started writing their curriculum pretty quickly because I had this background as an academic and researcher. And here we are today, and it's grown into something I certainly could not have imagined when I first started out. Yeah.
that's pretty cool. Yeah, when you're at uni, I think you're just living on vending machines and energy drinks and
Totally. Oh
not
my
getting any
gosh.
sunshine, vitamin D deficient.
You got it.
Yeah, because it's pretty cool because most people come from the other direction. They either study nutrition and they get the degrees that way, and then suddenly when they go in, they go, "Oh shit, this person's not doing what I tell them. I need to then learn psychology and habit change, behavior change." But obviously, it was kind of different for you. So you had that path, then you made your way into nutrition and started to learn the intricacies of that.
Well, yeah, and I think the benefit of that is that it makes it much more relatable. And I actually started out, even in high school, being really interested in learning disabilities and working with kids who had learning disabilities. And so, like, very early on, being really interested in, like, how do people learn and how do people change? And then, of course, teaching students at the undergraduate level. I mean, I taught hundreds and hundreds of students. And so you kind of start to get a really good appreciation for human behavior and human psychology and just the weirdness and wonderfulness of humans. And so I think in a way that's actually been much more helpful to me because if you're someone, I mean, everyone comes to things from different paths, right? So like there's no correct path, there's just pluses and minuses. But I think if you're someone who's been a lifelong athlete or, you know, has always been interested in nutrition, it's hard to get your head around people who are not, right? And one of the challenges of being a trainer or a coach is that often we are serving clients, not always, but often, who aren't like us, right? Maybe they're older, like maybe you're a young trainer but your clients are middle-aged or older, or you've always been active your whole life, but your clients are just new to exercise. So it's kind of a mind expanding practice. And so it's actually kind of a gift in lots of ways to have a bit of an unconventional path into things.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it's funny because even working in a commercial gym where there's like 40, 50 trainers, we'll be down in the locker room and you'll hear every time, "Oh, why won't this person do it?" So it's obviously the person who's genetically gifted. They've loved the gym the whole life. They love eating chicken, broccoli, and rice. And then they get frustrated because the person who main priority maybe their work and family and kind of fitness may fall down it. The trainer's head is they don't want enough. So do you see that a lot?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, I say this with compassion and empathy because from the trainer's perspective, I mean, you are literally in the gym all day. Like you work at a gym, your friends are gym people, like you typically tend to be part of a community that values health and fitness. So you don't really have a lot of opportunities to directly experience what life might be like. This is, I think, especially true if you're younger. I mean, aging is like one of the great equalizers, right? It doesn't matter if you were the most exceptional natural athlete at 21. Trust me, by the time you get to 50, like there's always a reckoning anyway. You've had to confront reality directly anyway. But yeah, it is really difficult. And one thing I do sometimes when I teach trainers is I draw out a pie chart of someone's average week, right? 168 hours. And it's like, okay, so we have this much for sleep and this much for housework and this much for commuting and this much for the job and this much for childcare. You know, even if you're still watching TV and scrolling social media, like there's still not a lot of hours or time or like energy and attention left for fitness. And I'm not saying it's not doable. I think it gives people a better sense of what they're working with, you know?
Yeah, then obviously a lot of trainers who obviously again they work in a gym, they'll kind of put it back and go, "Oh, this person's just making excuses," like obviously because they haven't lived and walked in that person's shoes. And that's a big thing about you guys in precision nutrition and yourself is the empathetic approach. where you care about the client, and that comes across well. So even with and this was definitely me when I was a younger trainer, it's hard to kind of get that respect of someone who's a bit older, or like you're trying to tell someone about psychology who's twice your age. It does help. I have a few gray hairs now. I think I equalized it a little bit. But what when trainers are giving plans out to people, and I've done this especially, you're trying to change too many things at once. So what's there's percentages thrown out where if you try to change more than 2 habits or whatever at a time, it increases the risk of 75%. What's kind of like the evidence based on that? And obviously it will vary between individuals.
Yeah, it's a great question. And there was a good book out there called, I think it was called The Power of Less by Leo Babauta. And he sort of self-experimented with this, which, so I think it's one of those great like anecdotal case report kinds of pieces of journalism. And so he tried changing all kinds of habits, different frequencies, different intensities. And basically what he settled on is if he tried to change one simple thing at a time, he was generally successful like 70 to 80% of the time. If he tried to change 2 things at the same time, he was down to like 30 to 40% success. And then by 3 things, it was like less than 10%. So, I mean, that's just kind of one guy's experience, but I think that's really played out. And the other piece of that, I think, is that we often don't see how complex a task is. It's like if you're teaching a little kid to tie their shoes. I had to do this recently, teach a little kid to tie their shoes. And I was like, actually, this is a really complex skill. There's like fine motor control, and there's spatial stuff, and there's like 3-dimensional rotation. You know, like it's it's actually quite complex. I kind of got stumped in how to teach it. And so I think, you know, if you're experienced in the field, or if you intuitively come to it, your mind just jumps, you know, step A, step B, step C, step D. And so you make this integrated whole in your brain of like, oh, this is just one single thing. But it's actually a number of smaller steps. And so another one of the things we do incorrectly often is give people a task that is actually composed of several smaller tasks without making sure that the person can do all those several smaller tasks. And an example of that is simply saying to a client, okay, you should eat more protein. Okay, cool. What foods have more protein in them, right? Like you may need to give your client a shopping list and say, let's tick off the ones that you like and will eat and can afford and know how to prep. Like it might be as rudimentary as that. So, you know, when in doubt, make it simpler and double check that that's what your client can manage.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it's an old mentor said the same about when he was one of his clients, he was trying to get them to food prep just because they're on the road for the whole week. And then it didn't stop at that. So he would ask them, okay, when are you going to the shopping market? What foods are you going to buy? Where's your shopping list? And I'm like, oh, I never thought like that. Normally you just tell people prep your food on Sunday, but that one is made up of totally a few different habits on its own.
Yeah, hugely. And it's interesting when I play this game in curriculum design sometimes, or coaching, where I think I'm going to segment things down to the smallest possible piece or the simplest possible atomic component. And let's see if I can reach a point where it actually becomes too simple to execute. And I have never reached that point where a client was like, you know what, this is too astonishingly simple. I reject it. Like it's interesting that, I don't know, we tend to undervalue simplicity, especially simplicity repeated often, because that's where the magic is, right? Like if I go to the store with a shopping list every single day or every single week or whatever my frequency is, and I do that consistently for 20 years, like how together am I going to be, right? Extremely. But it's a very simple activity. We really, I think we overvalue complexity and stuff and adding things and getting to the next level, and we undervalue simplicity, especially if done consistently.
Wow, that's amazing. So if whether it's a coach or whether it's someone trying to do it themselves, you may set a behavior and then that behavior is made up of individual components. And it's hard because we might scroll on social media and we'll see quotes such as, okay, just one change at a time. And in our head, they're like, all right, whatever. It's a bit more of a cliche than like what we actually take for granted. And then when people, and I've had clients do the same, when they're motivated to change, they'll get their shiny notebook out and write 10 goals they have to do: drink more water, do my steps, journal. And obviously, like you're saying, you're just setting yourself up for failure from the start.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, people in fact have a kind of a pattern, almost like if it's analogous to the feast and famine pattern. Many people have a pattern where they launch into things, they come out swinging, and the first week is tremendous, and they've got like gold stars and charts and trackers and apps and everything, and then boom, they crash. And that's actually a very, very common pattern, and it's very discouraging and very demoralizing for the person that's in it, because they think, oh my god, what's wrong with me? How come I keep messing this up? But the reality is you started too hard. I mean, it's like an exercise. You can't just like get out of bed and start sprinting. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, it's the same way. Again, when I deal with people online, they're just brand new to the gym, or they're getting back into it, and I might set 2 or 3 days in the gym. I go, Sean, no, I want to train every day. And it's actually harder to hold those people back. And again, you may kind of group into that more type A personality and the all or nothing. So how do you get around dealing with people like that? Because I know a lot of my clients, especially working in Sydney CBD, they will be that personality, which may serve them in other fields, but when it comes to fat loss and their health, it's kind of self-destructive.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you could probably make the argument that it doesn't serve them in other fields, right?
Mm.
And one of the questions we like to ask at Precision Nutrition, and not in a critical way, but how's that working for you? Like, if
Yeah.
you look back at the evidence of your own experience, has that worked for you or not, or somewhere in the middle? Has it worked a little bit, sometimes, not other times? You mentioned all or nothing thinking. I think that's a really important piece to bring out, because one of our jobs is teaching people to think along continuums, right? A little bit better, a little something, slowly adding, right? But to just look back at people's experience and say, okay, demonstrably by the evidence of your experience, what has worked better, worse, less, more, and let's build something out of what we know to be true. And people will know like pretty quick when they look back, they'll be like, oh yeah, that's true. The last 30 times I did that, it didn't work, right? But I mean, human beings are really funny. We have this weird attachment to like the hopeful future. Like, well, the last 30 times didn't work, but I
Mm-hmm.
feel like number 31, like
Yeah.
this is going to be it, right?
Yeah. It's like when people play the lotto.
That's
So
right.
when it comes to habit change as well, so you may be changing someone's behaviors along the way, but again, they may not be in a position at that moment of time to lose weight because all the behaviors are not adding up. We kind of want all the stars to align. So what other kind of measures of progress do you look at when you're changing habits? Do you look at the rate of ease is getting better, or just to keep that person in the game long enough? What are the little tricks they can do?
I love that. And I love that you said keeping the person in the game, because ultimately that is the coach's game, is to keep the person in the game, right? Because if they're not in the game because they're injured or demotivated or overwhelmed or whatever, then we lose, right? Then we've lost our coaching game. So the goal of the game is to stay in the game. Um, and in terms of other measures of progress, there's lots of them. And I think there are some that come sooner rather than later. So we try to focus on the easy wins. But one of the ones I like to focus on is simply the quality of the process. Did you do the thing that you committed to doing as often as possible, as well as possible, as confidently as possible? Did you find new ways to solve an old problem, right? So you can kind of look at that immediate process gain. Oh, you know what? You said you were going to do that thing 5 days in a row. You did 5 days. Good for you. That's awesome. So that's the
Mm-hmm.
immediate one. Often people will start to immediately feel a little bit more empowered, a little more confident, a little bit more like, oh, this is possible. So that's another measure of progress. Depending on what people are doing, this is going to kind of vary a little bit, but often people will say, I've started to have a little more energy. I've started to feel a little better. I've started to feel a little bit less anxious. Like there's different feeling kind of indicators that we can point to. So in the beginning, like really hammer down the process, right? The process, the progress is in the process. And then there are physical indicators that start to improve pretty quickly, depending. More energy is usually a big one. Reduction in pain or a little bit more mobility. Sometimes those come a little bit earlier on too. So those are the big ones in the beginning. And then you have other ones like, less pain, more mobility, sleeping better, feeling better about myself, getting more active. There's lots of stuff like that that you can point to. And then of course you can go to the body indicators, right?
Yeah.
Shrinking, clothes fitting better, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So all these non-scale victories, and obviously there will be slip ups on the way, but whether the person's trying to do it themselves, they're trying to mitigate their plan where they're just increasing the likelihood of success. Because is it true that positive reinforcement is just way more powerful, obviously reinforcing behaviors versus when someone slips up and then they feel bad and guilt and shameful?
Well, yeah, I mean, if that kind of negative reinforcement was going to work, we would all be Olympic champions, right? Like if all of us, if self-criticism worked, we would all be Oscar-winning symphony musician, Olympian, whatever's, right? Like, so if, so one of the things I like to start with is saying, look, if self-criticism was going to work, it would have worked by now. So why don't we try something different? And then I talk about how the brain learns by reward, right? You try something, you get a little hit, you're like, ooh, good for me, right? So positive reinforcement is actually a huge part of learning. So it's not just about touchy-feely, making people feel good. Positive reinforcement is a very tangible development of an action plan. Oh, I tried this, it worked, or it worked a little better. Cool, that gives me clues about what to do next. So positive reinforcement sets up a really nice feedback feedback loop in the brain, where you're like, oh, I did a thing that made me feel good. I'm going to do the thing again. So that's part of it. But also concretely, over time, as you sort of prototype, it gives you very clear direction on what to do next. Because what not to do is not an action plan. Like there's infinite things that we should be doing, right? But that doesn't point us towards what to do. And so where possible, unless what a person is doing is actively harming or damaging them, like every time they squat, they fall over or something like that, okay, you need to work on that. But unless something is actively causing harm, you can actually ignore it and focus on what's going well. And one more point about positive reinforcement, this is not like good job, like it's not a vague general like good for you. It's, hey, you did this thing, that was a good thing, or that was an effective thing, or here's how that thing moved your game forward. I'm going to call that out as evidence, and we're going to celebrate that and recognize it. So it's almost like building a case. Like if you think about this as being like a legal courtroom drama, you're building the case in favor of this direction that you're taking.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think especially important when it comes to fat loss or health in general, we never differentiate like beginners, intermediate, advanced. And a lot of the information people are taking on would be for that intermediate, advanced, meal timing, all the kind of intricacies that people are not at. Do you kind of agree that like most people, especially people I deal with at that beginning stage, it's more of a behavioral issue versus when someone's at the intermediate, advanced, that's when they're getting those transformations because they have all the habits in place and then they're just tweaking a few things, and that's kind of what you will see on social media a lot of the time.
Yeah, largely so. And I think we often focus on the what, right? What are people eating? How much? What foods? But we focus very, very little on the how, right? How are people organizing their lives in order to be able to do this? But that being said, we've had a few of our more advanced coaches experiment with, can you get advanced results with simple protocols? And in fact, you can. And people have been getting like competition shredded from these simple protocols because what they dialed down on was the consistency. So they were like, I'm going to take these simple protocols and be incredibly consistent with them just to see for a month or a couple of months, just to see. And it is the consistency of the simple actions that makes the magic. So in fact, advanced protocols are not even necessarily all that useful, even if for advanced people. But I think it is hard for regular folks to appreciate the degree to which professionals, let's call them professional dieters, like celebrities or whatever, organize their life around these practices. Like, or someone like an athlete, like an athlete's job is to train and recover and travel. And so they might be doing that 45, 50, 60 hours a week, all with all things combined. Like, this is not going to the gym 5 days a week. This is going to the gym twice a day, 7 days a week kind of thing. So I think a lot of people fail to appreciate, like, I think intuitively, if you say to someone, how do you think someone gets to be a professional musician? They would grasp that musician organizes their life around being the best of the best. But somehow when it comes to physique, I think people look at professionals and think, well, I should look like them if I just eat more spinach or whatever. It's like, no, you don't understand. This is this whole person's job. It is their life, and everything in their life, their relationships, their work, if they have a job outside of this, their hobbies. They don't have hobbies. This is their hobby. Like everything in their
Yeah.
life is organized around this. And I think coming to terms with that is super important for people to set realistic expectations about what's achievable.
Yeah, that's so true. It's just like comparing apples and oranges, your life and their life. It's completely different. Um, and when we're talking about changing small behaviors with that, you obviously have certain big rocks in your head in regards, maybe like creating a calorie deficit. All these things that will indirectly, will help that person mitigate the hunger and move more. So, what are some of like your big rocks that you will look at starting off?
One of the big rocks that I actually like to look at is just improving awareness. Because I think one of the big issues is that people do so much on autopilot. So much of our behaviors are automatic. So much of our behaviors are just patterns. And so simply getting people off the autopilot is actually a huge rock. And we call it notice and name, or you can think of it as building awareness. You can think of it as creating a pause or a space between an impulse or an urge and what you actually do. Like there's lots of ways to think about it. But one of the strongest tools in the toolbox is simply building an awareness of what you're doing or how choice A leads to outcome B. And this starts even before actually changing the behaviors, because sometimes people try to change their behaviors without really grasping like why they would do that, right? Like why would I eat more vegetables, or why would I get more sleep? Like they just know that they should, but they don't really know why. But when you build awareness, what happens is you start to feel the why. You're like, oh, that's what happens, right? So for example, let's say when you eat a ton of sugary kind of processed food, you don't feel so good. When you do that noticing and naming, you feel it in your body. You think, oh geez, I did this and now I feel that. Now I don't need to give you a diet plan that says don't eat this stuff, because you already now have a deeper grasp that that's maybe not the best choice for you. So awareness, notice and name, that kind of stuff is actually one of the biggest big rocks. And then related to that is, for people that are interested in fat loss, eating slowly with as few distractions as possible, because again, that starts to slow things down, gets you off the autopilot, gets you off the frantic gobbling over the sink or whatever it is you're doing. And it starts to regulate you from internally. So again, rather than having these outside rules like you should do this, you should do that, you start to feel it within your body. And that kind of tool of eating slowly isn't just for fat loss. It can be for anything, because it connects you to hunger, fullness, satiety. How do I feel when I eat this? How do I feel when I eat that? That can be used for all kinds of goals. So I mean, there's lots of big rocks, but I think those two are really a couple of the biggest that can be used for like all kinds of purposes, really.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the unsexy components. And there's some crazy statistics when they have gotten people to stop eating while they're watching YouTube. I think they've decreased their calorie intake by like 10, 20%, something crazy overall, that's a few hundred calories a day. That's already you achieving that calorie deficit. And like you said, with the awareness, because obviously awareness is the first step to behavior change, is when I'll get new clients in and I'll get them to track their food. I'm like, I don't really care about your calorie intake. I just want you to notice it, and I want to see your behaviors and what you're doing on a daily basis. So, would you do something similar, or would you write down the food and then how you feel after, or what kind of?
Yeah, something like that. I mean, we do we have a food journal option in our ProCoach software, and it's a very precision nutrition style food journal where it's like a photo of the food and notes about what it was, but no like 6 grams of this or 130. Like there's none of that. There's no numbers. So it's like, oh, this could be, I don't know, beef stew with potatoes, whatever. Here's a photo of it. When did I eat it? How did I feel when I ate it? So like, what was the context of it when I experienced it? And how much of it did I eat? And so like, that's a very minimalist approach, very holistic approach, but it gives you pretty much all the information that you need, right? As a coach, you can look at that and go, oh, portion sizes, that looks good or not, right? How did the person feel? Looks like they're eating all their meals stressed out. Well, let's work on that, right? So for anyone other than, let's say again, a professional that needed a very, very targeted numeric intake, that's something that I think would really work for most people. Like you say, just to build that awareness of like, take a moment before you eat and even notice that you are eating. Sometimes that's like, even noticing that it's like sometimes when you drive somewhere and you're not even really sure how you got there. I think a lot of people have these habitual eating patterns where maybe you start on a bag of chips in front of the TV and you're like, I didn't even know that I was doing that until I had this empty bag.
Yeah, and I think majority or 50, 60% they think on a normal workday is done so automatic that you're probably unaware aware of what you're actually doing. And one of
Totally.
the kind of philosophies that you talk about is you normalize quote unquote bad habits, and you talk about like the emotional part of our brain, and kind of how our brain maybe not the most logical organ in the body. So how do you feel that plays in? Because again, like we talked about, a lot of people when they carry out bad habits, they feel guilty, but when you normalize it, it makes it kind of easier to change in a way.
Yeah, and the word logical is an interesting one because if you understand the reasoning process, so to speak, of these other parts of our brain, they're
Mhm.
actually deeply logical.
Yeah.
It's just that they have objectives that are different from your rational, conscious, thinky brain, right? So their objectives are things around alleviating pain, keeping you alive, regulating particular homeostatic processes. So when you consider like the point of view, so to speak, that certain parts of your brain would have, it actually makes a ton of sense. So an example would be, okay, I've been dieting hard all week. I've been really restricting my energy intake and really trying to eat less. And then on Friday night, after a stressful week at work, I let it rip. I just, have some drinks and a bunch of pizza and whatever, right? And then on Saturday morning, I don't know why that happened. But if you look at those other parts of the brain, you can say, well, if it's absolutely reasonable that that would happen. You're under a lot of stress. Eating is a great stress relief. You were depriving your body of energy. Well, your hypothalamus is saying, hey, eat more. We need more energy intake, right? So it might help people to understand that actually what you're doing is completely rational. It's just that you don't understand the reasoning behind it, or you don't agree with it, right? You get mad at
Yeah.
your body, and a lot of people get mad at their bodies, like, stupid body, I can't believe it's doing this. It's like, no, your body's trying to keep you alive. It's just it's not doing it in the way that you would prefer. Or you might have learned protective responses early on in your life. This is a very common one. So typically people that have struggled with major weight their whole life have something that happened to them early on in their life
Hmm.
that made weight gain a very protective response. It's a very protective response to trauma for various reasons. So your body is simply executing patterns that were protective that it learned early in life, and it doesn't know that now you're an adult and maybe you don't necessarily need these strategies anymore.
Yeah, and that's kind of the intertwining relationship of our physiology and psychology, which a lot of the time, unfortunately, is separated. And the fact that people will talk about how when you're on a diet and you drop your calories too low, you're obviously going to crave more food and your hunger is going to go up. But then when you mix the emotional component in there as well, it's kind of like a double whammy. Um,
Yeah,
and you can completely understand where your body's coming from. Um,
totally.
and like you said, with the trauma, because there's a lot of research that whatever underage abuse or sexual abuse is linked to a lot of obesity. Again, people that use food to fill that void, and that kind of stays with them. When would you recommend that somebody may seek that psychological help for it? This is just the speed bump that they keep going over.
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's no like simple answer to it because part of what makes you effective with a client is your ability to develop a relationship, right? And kind of an alliance. We call it the therapeutic alliance or the coaching alliance, right? So it's you and the client working together in a strong relationship against the problem, whatever the problem is. And so sometimes you will have that relationship very early on, that the client will trust you. So when you say, hey, listen, I think it might be a good idea for you to get some extra support, here's what I would recommend. That may be a completely straightforward thing. And the client may say, oh, thanks, right? With other clients, they may not be willing to go there now or ever. Like it doesn't even
Yeah,
really
yeah.
matter how great your relationship is. So a lot depends on what is your relationship with the client. How is their situation presenting? How open are they? I mean, do they really want to change this? And I like to just straight up ask clients, do you actually want to change? And a lot of them are taken off guard by that. And you don't say it in an accusatory way. It's more of a curious question, like, given all of this, do you actually want to change this? And no is a perfectly acceptable answer. You don't have to want to change this.
Yeah.
Let's just get real about whether you want to change this or not.
Mm-hmm.
And often that question really gives clients pause, because frequently they'll say, you know what? I don't think I'm as ready to change as I thought. Or yes, I would love to transform my body, but I don't think I'm yet willing to do a lot of the things that it would take. But I might be willing to work on this other piece, or I might be willing to scale back my expectations. But simply asking, do you want to change right now? And making no an acceptable answer is important. And then in terms of when to refer, how to refer, one of the things I like to say is like, look, the best athletes have the most coaches. So in order for you to progress, you're probably going to need more coaching support. Is there someone that we can add to your support team to help you with these particular things that are a little bit outside my scope of practice? And it's not just like trauma. I mean, it can be relationship counseling.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I think that like 80% of our clients would probably benefit from like interpersonal social skills training, because a lot of their stress or their difficulties come from social, relational, interpersonal dynamics, right? I argued with my husband and then I went and ate some ice cream, or, you know, my coworkers were super annoying and I, you know, got stressed out after work and I ate. So, you know, there's so many dimensions of life that our coaching practice touches on that we do have to be aware of. And it's why we talk about deep health at Precision Nutrition, but we can't necessarily address it directly. And so we have to have kind of a good, you know, running roster of like, hey, for this, you know, I suggest this kind of person. But it is a very like context dependent kind of situation. And sometimes clients will never want to change, and that's okay too.
Yeah, you could probably increase the need for relationship counselors during COVID as well. I think they're running out of divorce lawyers, lawyers in China. They're making an absolute fortune. Just like
Yes.
Zoom, they're just capitalizing on everyone's misfortune.
True story.
But I like the way when you're asking questions and you're putting it back on them, and obviously removing the stigma of psychology, which is probably still around when it comes to kind of seeking help, ironically. But just switching points a little bit on that, because when you ask questions, it's kind of like motivation and interviewing in a way where you're trying to guide the person or make them figure it out for themselves. A lot of people I deal with, they may have like friends or family who are at this stage where you probably look at them and go, that person needs help. If way overweight, they're very unhealthy, they're probably at risk of dying here. And then people may go along and say, and pester them and dictate them, look, you need to join the gym, you need to do this. And if we kind of look at the stage of change, they may be in that like pre-contemplation phase. How do people go about asking these questions to loved ones, and what kind of ways are they guiding them through that process?
Well, I mean, this is a sticky situation, right? I mean, coaching and giving helpful advice, finger quotes, to friends and family is always a very difficult and dicey situation. And I think we go into situations with an underlying belief that people should change.
Mm-hmm.
God damn it, right? You should want to change. You should want to do X, Y, and Z. So one of the first things to do is to kind of interrogate our own assumptions and our own beliefs about what this person should want to do. It's almost like we get into this like moralistic, you know, well, everyone should want to blah, 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 right? So that's kind of piece number one. But we can certainly listen, understand, and potentially evoke change talk in people, right? We can talk to people very honestly about like, hey, you know, what is it you like about this? I'll give you an example. And it's not about fitness, it's about wearing a helmet. So I recently had this discussion with my partner, who was an avid cyclist and motorcyclist, about wearing a helmet. And he said, well, you know, next time we go out on the bike, I might not wear a helmet. I was like, what? I mean, I'm super safety conscious, right? I'm like, oh, that's terrible, right? I immediately went right to judgment. Yeah, but then I was like, okay, Krista, shut up, listen and learn. There's a rationale for this, right? And so I said, well, what is it about not wearing a helmet that for you feels valuable? And he described like all these things about, oh, it feels, you know, it's cumbersome. You get hot. It feels really good when you're out on the bike and you can feel the wind, you know. And so by the end, I was like, had I rushed to tell this person, you need to wear a helmet, you must do this, you should do that, I would not have learned these things about him that are a real demonstration of what he values in life. And so in a way, it's almost like we need to approach this with a kind of inquisitiveness. Like, what can I learn about this friend or family member that I have that maybe I didn't know about? Maybe there's a dimension of them that I actually didn't know about, or there are things that they value that I didn't realize about them. Maybe, for example, they are not people who plan ahead. They live for the moment. They're like, you know what? I want to eat the ice cream now. I might get hit by a bus tomorrow. The global pandemic has shown me that I could die tomorrow, right? So I'm going to eat the ice cream now. And this might be like, oh, you know, that's really interesting. This person has a different philosophical worldview than me. So, and then I would just stop there and let the seeds sprout.
Mm-hmm.
But what I would not do is say, you should do this, you should do that, because that is a guaranteed fail, I assure you. Even if it feels like it should work, it will not.
Yeah, it's a mistake I've made, and probably a lot of coaches continue to make it, especially because you're so passionate about helping people that, in fact, when you probably dictate to them and push more, they're going to resist back, and you may be delaying the time they will change and making that situation worse.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and one of the ways to enhance people's readiness for change, though, is to, you know, offer the carrot, so to speak, right? The incentive. Like, is there something fun or valuable to this person that would be part of, you know, doing these health promoting behaviors? So, for example, with my partner, he likes to ride bikes and he likes to spend time with me. So it's like, hey, do you want to spend time with me riding a bike? Cool. Rather than saying, you should exercise because it's good for you. Like, he doesn't care about that, right? But what he does like is being outside, hanging out with me, riding a bike, maybe going, you know, to some fun adventure. Those are the things he values. So that's a much more, you think about the difference between like a push and a pull motivation, right? So rather than being pushed away from something bad, it's usually better to get pulled towards something good, something that you genuinely appreciate and would enjoy. That's much more energizing in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's exactly why obviously people are hobbies. It's not really exercise for them, and they're just doing it automatically. We touched on the point before, about kind of people that say, I can't really do this, or it may have a high external locus of control, and the fact that they may have that mindset that, oh, they can't do it for this reason or this reason. And then you get clients that have a like high internal locus of control that will put it down. No, it's a problem. I can fix it. How do you go about not fixing this, but kind of dealing with clients that may have that train of thought? And again, I'm not sure why people do. Could be many reasons.
Yeah, I mean, the question of why is sort of an interesting one. And I think you can probably look at, like, you know, people's early life. It's like, did you learn that you had control over your world or not, right? There could, you know, you could have spent your childhood learning very clearly that you do not have control over things, that there are bigger people and stronger people in the world that control you. And then, you know, someone raised differently may have been taught or more importantly, directly experienced that they can affect, you know, the things around them. So I think that people tend to have a natural tendency towards these things, but then the rest of it is definitely very constructed and very practiced. So we can be taught these things, and they're like any other skill. We can learn and build them. And so for helping people build an internal locus of control, so that kind of, I call it the internal compass, right? That internal driver of your behavior, in a sense of like, yeah, you know what, I can act on my own behalf in the world. I like to start with little experiential tasks, like go and find some tiny thing that you can exert control over, and not in like a rigid go and control it, but like go and exert your will on something. And then to go back to what we were talking about earlier, reward that, recognize it, celebrate it. Hey, I did this. I exerted my will on something and I was successful. Awesome. Well, what does this tell me about future options? I bet you I can go exert my will on this other thing and be successful. So you set up almost like little tiny mini challenges that are just challenging enough that you feel good about it, but not so challenging that they're overwhelming. And then you're getting your belief reinforced, like, see, stuff's out of my control, too bad, right? So the job of the coach is to kind of calibrate the task level, the right level, so it's just enough that it's like, you know, the client has to put a little energy into it, but it's not so much that it's overwhelming. And that will be different for everyone. And the celebration piece is really key. Like when I just finished my taxes, which was a complete, I hate doing taxes. I
Yeah.
put it off every year. Thank God COVID gave us like a several months extension, right? But when I finished my taxes, I was like, I am going to celebrate because I feel a brief moment of empowerment. Like, hey, that wasn't so bad. I did that. Right? It wasn't an insurmountable task. I can have control over my own life. And and as much as possible, the coach can model this message too. One of my colleagues slash mentors is a coach in Singapore, and her mantra is, I create. So it's not just controlling, but it's creating. So you can model that to your clients and tell them, no, you create, you have responsibility, you have agency, you can act. So you can kind of keep just asking your clients, okay, cool, what can you do right now? What can you do to get back into control? What can you do to move to, towards the future you want, or whatever. And one of the exercises we do with clients is called sphere of control. You've probably seen it. It's just 3 circles. The smallest circle is things I can control. The middle circle, which is like a concentric circle, is things I sort of can control. And then the biggest circle on the outside is things I can't control. Well, we can't control COVID, right? Like we can't control the presence of a global pandemic, but we can decide whether to wash our hands, whether to wear a mask, whether to stand 6 feet away from people, right? There are things that are still within our power to manage. So helping clients see very clearly what are the things I can't, and sort of control is really useful, because I think a lot of the times they're trying to control uncontrollable things and not recognizing how much control they have over the controllable things.
Yeah, beautifully put. I actually never thought about them. It makes perfect sense. They may have just a set of rose-tinted glasses that been formed where they're growing up, but then obviously if they've been trying to lose weight, and especially people may have been overweight a lot of their life, and the fad diets that are out there, they're constantly just reinforcing that they can't do it and can't do it and can't do it, and then eventually that just becomes a belief of mindset. Again, coming full circle to what we were talking about before, our kind of job is, or whether you're trying to lose fat on your own, is to set yourself up for success. And I suppose as you do that, you maybe begin to kind of rewire the thoughts in your brain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you have that ongoing reinforcement of like, yes, this is the path, this is the path, this is the path. And I mean, a good example of what people think they have control over is their body, right?
Yeah,
and to help them understand, you mentioned playing the lotto earlier. I think of all of this as like a game of statistics or a game of probabilities. When I used to work with fighters, they would say, well, I need to get down to a certain weight class, right? They would be cutting weight down to a certain weight class. And I would say, I cannot guarantee that you will be fighting at 135 or 155 or whatever. I can only help you ensure that you do the behaviors that significantly increase the probability of getting that outcome. But fundamentally, whether your body decides to be 135 pounds is uncontrollable. So I think, like, as a coach, recalibrating people's understanding of what you can control and what you can't, in a way is very refreshing too. Like, it helps clients let go of this white knuckled attempt to like manage the universe that they can't control, and which completely distracts them from actually doing something productive in a way and proactive.
Yeah. And just to nearly finish it up, it's kind of frustrating on my part, like you said earlier, when we look at losing weight or getting healthy, we kind of learn about calories, nutrition, but we don't learn about how to implement these behaviors. So how can people kind of learn more about the practical approach and the scientific approach, rather than what we may see on social media, people just throwing generic terms about mindset and stuff like that? These are actually very practical things that people can implement into the day. So where can they find your work? Where can they find other people's you may recommend?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned motivational interviewing. If folks want to take a deep dive into that, that's extremely useful. I mean, I highly recommend doing a workshop, because it's one of those things you have to sort of do in person, like doing a workshop, watching a video. There's several books on motivational interviewing. They're a little dry. It's kind of hard to, visualize how it works. But there's motivational interviewing. I think it's called motivational interviewing in health and fitness, or fitness. I forget exactly, but it's, in the health and fitness domain. There's the classic motivational interviewing textbook. So that's one place that's really solid to start. Obviously, precisionnutrition.com. We have a ton of free stuff, like really in-depth coaching articles. There's our certification. We're actually working on some new courses. This is like super secret new information, which will not be super secret soon. But we're working on a whole roster of other courses that are more targeted, right? Like working with athletes, for example, that break it down. We call it a GSPA framework. So goals, skills, practices, actions. So in our certification and then in the other courses we're producing, we really try to do that thing that you're talking about, where we make it super concrete. Like, okay, so your client needs to eat more protein. What does that even mean? Here's a, step by step. We call it being a line cook. You know how a line cook like follows a recipe, right? Step 1, step 2, step 3. So in all of our materials aimed at training coaches, we do that. So whether you want to go for the free stuff, cool. If you want to enroll in the cert, that's cool too. But it's definitely a thing that we do. And then of course, I mean, depending how into it you want to get, there are a lot of professional trainings for coaches or counselors. I was sneaking into counseling training like well before anyone would allow me to do it. I just, a lot of universities or private institutions will offer some kind of behavioral change program for professionals. The one I highly recommend is BJ Fogg's Tiny Habits Coaching.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's terrific. I love BJ Fogg. He's tremendous. So you can sign up for the Tiny Habits Coaching program, which, as its name implies, is very tiny. It's very manageable. So there's lots of places you can be looking for sure.
Yeah, it's great for coach and obviously clients alike when they're interested in behavioral change to go and you need that kind of the line cook, especially at the start, because then you'll develop into the Michelin star chef hopefully as you go on, and it'll become a bit more intuitive. Oh, that was unbelievable. I wanted to thank you for coming on. I really, really appreciate time. Big inspiration for me, and it was an absolute honor having you on.
Oh, my pleasure. And I can tell that you're someone who's done the research in this field. I noted several areas where you dropped a few stats or a few knowledge bombs there. So I can tell that this is something that, you're really engaged in. And so, my guess is that your practice and skill will only improve.
Yeah, I've done both
well.
the precision nutrition course 1 and 2, so I couldn't recommend them highly enough as well.
Yeah, good. Thanks for the endorsement.
Thanks again.
My pleasure.